Welcome to our deep dive. We're tackling the page object model today, and I think you're really going to like this one. It's all about making your Selenium automation cleaner, more maintainable, and seriously scalable. If you're looking for that secret sauce to master automation, POM, is it?
Yeah, it's a total game changer. You know how frustrating it is when the website changes and suddenly all your tests are breaking? POM swoops in to save the day. It's like a blueprint for interacting with each page, keeping everything organized and in check.
Okay, so instead of code scattered everywhere, we've got these page objects, right? But how does that translate into cleaner code? I'm intrigued.
Let's take a login page, for example. With POM, you'd create a login page object, and inside you'd define all the elements, like the username field, password field, and of course the login button. But here's the cool part. You're not just listing them, you're defining how to interact with them. So you might have methods like enter username, enter password, and click login.
Ah, I see. So my test script doesn't have to scramble to find the right elements anymore. I can just tell the login page object what to do.
Precisely. And what's really fascinating is that this taps into the power of object-oriented programming. It's a way of organizing code that makes it super reusable. So instead of rewriting the same login code over and over, you have this handy login page object ready to go.
Okay, I've heard of that. But to be honest, it kind of makes my head spin.
No worries. Think of it like Legos. Each brick is an object, and you can combine them to build anything. In POM, each page object is like a Lego set for that page. It's got all the pieces, the elements, and the instructions, the methods, to work with that specific part of the website.
Okay, the Lego analogy definitely helps. And we even have a Java code example to illustrate this. It's a simple login page class showing how those web elements are defined and used.
It's great to visualize, especially if you're comfortable with code. But even if you're not a coding whiz, the main takeaway is this. POM organizes your code. It models each page as an object, making your code cleaner, easier to update, and way less repetitive.
That's fantastic. And who doesn't love less repetition?
Right. It's all about working smarter, not harder. And that's just the beginning. POM has some really neat tricks up its sleeve, like lazy initialization.
Lazy initialization. Now that sounds interesting. Especially if it means I can, be lazier with my coding.
In a way it does. See, with POM, you can tell Selenium to only load elements when they're actually needed. It's like ordering takeout, right? You wouldn't want the delivery driver to show up before your food is ready.
Okay, I like that analogy. So instead of loading everything on the page right away, I can wait until I need it. How does that work in the code?
Well, Selenium has this feature called Page Factory. And when you combine that with POM, you can use these cool things called annotations, like @findBy.
Yeah.
The magic is that those elements don't actually load until your test needs them.
Oh, I see. So if my test needs to type in the username, the login page object will go and fetch that element. But if the test skips the username and goes straight to the password, it just waits.
Exactly. And this lazy loading can really speed up your tests, especially on those complex pages.
I'm sold on lazy initialization. It's brilliant. But what if I have a bunch of tests that need to log in with different usernames and passwords? Do I need a separate method for each combination? That seems like it could get messy fast.
That's where parameterization comes in.
Yeah.
With parameterized methods, you can pass in different values each time. So no need for login with user 1 and login with user 2 methods. You just have one login method that takes the username and password as parameters.
That makes a lot more sense. My test script can just tell the login page object to log in with whatever credentials I need.
Right. And while we're on the topic of keeping things neat and tidy, another best practice with POM is decoupling test logic from test data.
Decoupling, that sounds a bit technical. Can you break that down for me?
Sure. Let's say you're testing a purchase flow. Your script might have the product name, quantity, shipping address, all that stuff.
Yeah.
But what if you want to run that same test with different products or user details?
I'd have to go in and manually change the script every time, right? Yikes.
Exactly. That's where decoupling comes in. Instead of hard coding that data into your script, you store it externally. Think spreadsheets, JSON files, even databases.
Okay, so my test script just says run the purchase test, and it grabs all the details it needs from a separate file. That way I can easily swap out the data without touching the actual test code.
It's a super smart way to make your test more flexible and reusable. You could have one spreadsheet with data for different user types, another for different products, and so on. Your test scripts stay the same, you just change the data files.
Now that's powerful stuff. It's perfect for teamwork too. Everyone can access and update the data without messing with the core code.
Exactly. And another big win for POM is readability. Even if someone on your team isn't a coding expert, they can look at a POM framework and understand what's going on.
That's great for collaboration. No more relying on one person to decipher everything.
Right. POM brings clarity to the whole team.
POM really does seem to make everything so much clearer, not just the code itself, but for the whole team. You mentioned debugging earlier. How does POM help with finding and fixing those pesky bugs?
Well, when your locators are all over the place, it's like trying to find a needle in a haystack when something breaks. But POM keeps all your locators organized in those page objects. So if a test fails, you know exactly where to look.
Oh, so instead of searching through tons of code, I can go straight to the login page object and check the locator there. That sounds way more efficient.
Exactly. And it makes updates a breeze, too. Remember, if the developers change the ID of the login button, with POM you only have to update it in one place, the login page object.
That's right, no more hunting down every single instance of that locator. That could save so much time and frustration. What about scalability? You mentioned that POM can grow with your application. How does that work in practice?
As your application grows, you'll have new pages and features to test. With POM, you just create new page objects for those new pages. Each page object is self-contained, so it doesn't affect your existing tests. It's like adding new Lego sets. They don't mess up what you've already built.
That's a great way to put it. So if we add a new shopping cart page, I just create a shopping cart page object and integrate it. No need to rewrite a ton of code or worry about breaking things.
Exactly. And because each page object has a specific focus, your code stays organized even as your application grows.
It's like a perfectly organized filing system for your automation. But are there ever situations where POM might be overkill?
That's a good question. And it's important to remember that POM isn't always the best solution for every project. For example, if you're working on a really small project with just a few pages, setting up a full POM framework might be more trouble than it's worth.
Right, it's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut. So if I'm just starting out with a small personal project, I might want to keep things simple at first.
Exactly. You can always add POM later as your project gets bigger and more complex.
This has been a fantastic deep dive into POM. It sounds like a must-have for anyone using Selenium.
I agree. It's a game changer for making your automation maintainable, scalable, and readable.
But before we wrap up, I want to go back to something you said earlier. You talked about using the principles of POM beyond just web automation, and I found that really intriguing.
Oh, absolutely. You see, the core ideas behind POM, things like breaking down complexity and reusing components, those aren't limited to just coding. They're good design principles that you can use almost anywhere.
So it's not just about writing better code, it's about thinking smarter about how to solve any problem.
Exactly. Imagine using these principles for something like planning a trip. You could break the trip down into smaller parts like transportation, accommodation, activities, and treat each part as a separate module. You could even make reusable templates or checklists for certain tasks.
That's a great example. By breaking a big task into smaller pieces and making things reusable, you can really streamline the whole process.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of these design principles.
Yeah.
They're not just about code, they're about thinking systematically and finding elegant solutions.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, and I think our listeners are leaving with a great understanding of POM, but also a fresh perspective on problem solving. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and for sparking these interesting thoughts.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, I encourage you to keep exploring POM and see if you can find connections to other areas of your life. You might be surprised at what you discover.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Remember, the best way to learn is by doing, so dive in, experiment, and see how you can use POM in your own projects and beyond. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning.